We know that managers are more likely to give feedback when they feel like they have the concrete techniques to facilitate a feedback conversation. So what we're going to do is really introduce a model that enables you to start a feedback conversation, and then we'll talk about what you do after you initiate that conversation. The model that we're going to introduce is called the SBI model, Situation, Behavior, Impact. How many folks in the room are familiar with this model? Okay, great, so some of you. For those of you who are, I invite you to add to this conversation by talking about how you've used the model and ways in which it's been beneficial for you. So let's take a look at the three component parts. The first part is what we call situation, right? What is it that happened that's prompting you to give feedback? Okay, so describe the circumstances in which the behavior you're going to be giving feedback about happened, right? It's the when. When did this happen? And get specific. And remember that we talked about just a moment ago, best practices for giving feedback is being able to deliver that feedback within a reasonable amount of time from when the incident has happened. And reasonable will depend on your context and what's realistic, but if you wait a week or several weeks to deliver feedback, it can be very hard to make the situation feel relevant, right? Because it's so far in the past. So make sure that when you describe the situation and you're sharing that feedback, it's close enough in time that it works for folks. So the situation. The next component is behavior, right? Specifically, what actions did this person do? What did they do that's prompting you to give feedback? And then lastly, the impact. The impact of their behavior on anybody who kind of, felt what happened. It could be their team, it could be you, it could be clients, it could be all of the above. But the idea is, how did this impact others? In a positive way or in a negative way? So we talked about the importance of giving positive feedback and negative feedback. What I'm going to do is model how you would use this particular SBI model to initiate a feedback conversation in both a positive feedback conversation and a negative feedback conversation. So let's take a look at this example. During the staff meeting, when you stood up and thanked your team members for working overtime to complete the project, you really made the team feel appreciated. What you did showed great leadership and encourages others on the team to find ways to recognize each other. You're helping to build a strong and motivated team. Okay? So situation, during our staff meeting. Behavior, when you stood up and thanked the team members. So on and so forth. And then the impact. It really made people feel appreciated. You showed great leadership. It encourages others on the team to recognize and find opportunities to recognize each other. And you're helping to build a strong and motivated team. So what you're doing here as a manager is you're identifying all of the areas of impact. And remember, there may be several. So you should really make sure that you're aware of all of the areas of impact and you're articulating them clearly. Let's take a look at a second example. This is going to be an example of how you might deliver or start a feedback conversation when the feedback is negative. I saw that you were yelling and shaking your finger at Marie yesterday after she agreed with you. Sorry, you'll read the slide correctly, right? I saw that you were yelling and shaking your finger at Marie after she disagreed with you. What you did made Marie feel threatened and makes others on the team reluctant to disagree with you because they're afraid you'll respond aggressively. We've worked hard to create an environment where people are encouraged to share their ideas and respectfully disagree. Your behavior prevents people from exchanging ideas, which limits our team's ability to be creative and collaborative. Okay, so after you've read the example, again, you're going to sort of break out the three component parts. What you'll notice here is that situation and behavior are tightly compacted in the first sentence. So I saw that you were yelling and shaking your finger at Marie after she disagreed with you. The situation, right, when you were yelling and shaking your finger is when it happened, and it's also a behavior. So there's sort of a compounding here of that situation, the context in which it happened, and the behavior. If you're giving this feedback several days after it's happened, then you might add something like on Monday, right, when you were in the hallway. So you can expand this out further. If you're giving it shortly thereafter, and in this kind of situation, when there's been a confrontation, an almost physical confrontation, this is the kind of feedback you'd give very, very immediately. And so if you're going to do that, you probably don't need to give a whole lot of context, right? At 3 o'clock today when this happened. That may be unnecessary. So the situation and the behavior are right up front. And then there's quite a bit of information about the impact, right? And when you give negative feedback, you want to be really clear about those impacts, because that's what helps people understand that this is not about me as a person. This is about my behaviors and the impact of those behaviors. And when you can focus the conversation there, that really helps people have a robust conversation and invest in changing their behavior, because they don't feel personally attacked in the same way that they do if you use a different kind of model where you talk about, I'm really disappointed in you, right? That's not an effective way to give feedback. Instead, we want to talk about what they did, when they did it, and how it impacted people. Now, I've mentioned that you use this model to start a conversation about feedback, right? So if we go back for a second and we look at this example, this doesn't tell somebody what they should do with the feedback. It just sort of lays out the feedback and the impact of it. But the question is, where do you go from there as a manager, right? And the answer is, you have a number of different options available to you. And I'm going to look at 3, which sort of end up being, in a very simplistic way, the 3 options that you have available to you. One option, after you deliver feedback, is to say to the employee, this is what you need to do, right? So if you have somebody who's repeatedly late, you may very clearly say to them, you need to be here on time, and I need you to email me every day when you get in at, whatever time we agree upon, so that I know you've arrived. And that might be a very clear way to explain to them what your expectations are and what you expect them to do, okay? As trainers, what you're going to do here is you're going to present each one and ask people one at a time, right? With each example or with each option, when would you use this? What might be some of the advantages to using this? And then you're going to add to that discussion. So the idea here is that you're giving people these options, which they're going to be hopefully familiar with. And then you're emphasizing that people need to be aware that different situations will require different types of options in terms of how people come up with ways to actualize the feedback that's being given. So just be prepared to facilitate that conversation and add to it. And then they'll have an activity where the first part is them practicing starting the conversation by using SBI with a partner. And then the second part will be facilitating a conversation and taking it a step further and trying to use some of the options here, right? And get people to actualize the feedback and come up with a plan to implement the feedback. And they're going to get a lot of resistance. The idea here being that people can experience what it's like to try to manage a difficult feedback conversation, which sets us up for the next module where we talk about the concrete techniques people can use when managing difficult conversations.